Trump pulls the funding for this canard. Just outrageous. Arnaud, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm fine, a little bit under the weather. Thank you for
Oh,
asking.
I'm sorry. You're not the only one. It's wait a minute. Was I supposed to talk to you today? I mean, there's been so many people who I hit up. Many of those people effectively had colds. Um, in fact, I think it's like 4 people that I hit up, and all of these people effectively were ill. So I'm sorry to hear that, man. I hope you feel better.
All
Um,
right, we'll manage.
okay, so I was going into the audience. Oh, and just for the audience to know, Arnaud Develay, he's an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. Um, Funding thing. I was fascinated by this. I showed this clip or this video yesterday, and 90% of Ukrainian media survived on money from the US State Department. 90%. And then you had some stories that reported there was like independent media suffered when Donald Trump pulls US aid because 90% of independent media was being paid for by the US government. It's like, okay, is it really independent media if 90% of it is being paid by the United States government? And then those stories get reflected back into the United States. So it's like the State Department secretly pays for basically all of the media in Ukraine. The US media then goes to Ukraine and pulls stories out of Ukrainian media that is being paid for by the US State Department. And it's like, do we really believe that the Ukrainian media, that's where 90% of it is being funded by the State Department, is going to give a line that is going to be different than the US point of view? Of course, the answer is no. Obviously, it's going to affect their editorial points of view, or it's going to affect what they run with in regards to the stories that they run with, or the editorial points of view that they espouse. I was fascinated by this. And then there's a question that needs to be asked: where else do we have this much clout and this much influence? Because US aid, National Endowment for Democracy, all of these things were effectively CIA cutouts. They were used to overthrow governments. They were used to influence governments, influence the political space. And we are now seeing that in this kind of hyperbolic way in Ukraine. Just astonishing. Give me your take on this. What is the effect of having 90% of media being funded by the US State Department?
Well, as you say, it reflects, to me, Ukraine is like the exemplar of the NGO, USAID, USAID policies of contributing to shape the narrative, manipulate perception,
Mhm.
impose agenda in a subliminal way, and in so doing facilitate then the adopting of pro US interest legislation within the country under scrutiny. So it's not really surprising in that sense that Ukraine is, again, it's ground zero of this uh, type of foreign meddling. Let's call it what it is. And so it's not really surprising. I guess 90%, the number itself, is somewhat surprising. You would think they would give the change, and would have something more about the line of 62%, No, it's 90%, just to
That
make
is
sure.
an astonishing number, man. I saw that number, my mouth hit the floor. 90%. Like, you are effectively funding all of their media. Like, the State Department is effectively propping up that government and the propaganda that is coming out of that government. Meaning, what
Mhm.
Ukrainians are effectively getting is US State Department crafted stories. Just
That's right.
90%.
But this goes way back. I mean, you have to understand this is something that's been worked on for at least 50, 60 years, going back to 1950s.
Yeah.
You look at institute like the Tavistock Institute or the Bertelsmann Foundation. They've been engaging in weaponizing public perception over a
Mhm.
long term so as to undermine fundamental tenets of sovereign societies, traditional family value, the construction critical theory as a substitute for traditional Marxist thought. All those things have been going on for decades. I mean, they've been working on it, and now they've got algorithm using social medias where remind people you are the product. That's why it's free. They've been devising an entire mapping of the human mind in such a way that using certain algorithm, they can influence the narrative at the touch of a button, literally.
Yeah.
And this is what we've seen the last 15, 20 years, especially with the so-called Arab Spring. A lot of it was powered by social media.
Mhm.
So you coordinate this with Rent a Crowd, NGOs within the countries promoting certain social, societal, some would say, agendas. And next thing you know, the country that's targeted has lost all of its antibodies, all its defense mechanism, and it's just easy to just slice it open and
Mhm.
operate, a regime change without having to deploy traditional armies with occupation armies on the ground. It's using, of course, a fifth column. You always have to, each country has different parameters that agencies in the West are examining as a prying device, bearing on religious division, ethnic fault lines, and if not, trying to buy the local elites or parts of it, compradors elite, and have them do the undermining work,
Mhm.
so, and they're very patient at it. It's very subtle. It's not, that they know what they're doing, and it's by wave. So they may actually fail the first time around, but they planted seeds which will then be exploited 5, 10 years down the road with a renewed vigor and with added results. So Ukraine, in that sense, is the again ground zero of this. I mean, they've managed to turn a country that shares 99%, and that's actually really 99% of its history and cultural kinship with Russia into a resolutely anti-Russia machine,
Yeah.
almost to the upteenth degree. It's unbelievable, and they've done so in what if we go back to the 2004 Orange Revolution, that's merely 20 years, but that's one generation right there. So, and young people are particularly easy and receptive to manipulation. And so next thing you know, you have completely bewitched an entire generation to throw themselves into the furnace for some kind of deluded notion of an alternate history of what Ukraine might have been about. But everybody knows that Ukraine is the cradle of Russian culture.
This is horrendous. I mean, like, it is horrendous. Like, because that number gets across, like you said, the amount of propaganda that was effectively being dispensed across the population. It was almost like leaflets. But in this case, the people are not being told the US State Department pays for this. They're not being told that at all. In fact, the media said this was independent media that was being funded 90% by the State Department. It's like, okay, are you serious? Are you really saying that this is independent media when the US State Department is effectively paying for all of it? I mean, just outrageous. How else does this, we're seeing a huge amount of pressure that's being put on various governments, let's say in Georgia, Slovakia, Hungary. I mean, the money that was going from US aid, it's going to all of those also, right? Like, many of these NGOs are effectively being funded through US aid or National Endowment for Democracy, even in Europe, correct?
Especially in Europe, yes, very likely. And going back to Ukraine, I can give you a concrete example of how media, partially or substantially owned by US interest, get to be used and weaponized against, for instance, uh, US citizens who might not be on the page as to what is being engineered in Ukraine. And I spoke about this in my book. The Manafort affair was initially peddled out by a weekly in Ukraine, who was substantially funded by the Soros Open Society Foundation. So it was first the story broke out about the alleged payout by the party of Region 2 Manafort and the ledger, the secret black book.
Mhm.
And from that point on, it was then picked up only a month later by the US media in New York Times, Washington Post. And Anne Applebaum was the one who basically was the point woman on the US side, on the US side of the Atlantic. But we all recall that she's married to this Polish foreign minister who's most famous for the comments he made on X back in 2022 when Nord Stream 2 was blown out, and he actually said, "Thank you, the US." So it's all connected. It's a small galaxy of operators, deep state operators. You find them in so-called academia, in foreign services of countries that are completely under the thumb of the NATO US condominium. And they basically echo each other and create this kind of somehow echo chamber. Yeah, that's, I guess, the word. And this is what happened with Manafort. And it was, again, initially a Ukrainian weekly magazine. Was called Nidele Slavelo Nidele. You look it up.
Mhm.
And on that newspaper magazine also worked a U.S. agent who was serving as a reporter, but feeding the story and the elements of the criminal offense, the alleged criminal offense, to the National Bureau Against Corruption put in place by the U.S. after the Maidan. See, so they weaponize the news staff through their local media that are subsidized by U.S. interest, and then they use that information and they give it to an organism, an institution that is tasked in fighting corruption in Ukraine. And this reporter also serves as a Ukrainian Rada deputy. So he has this other forum where he can, keep the story alive, so to speak, and take it into a new level.
Yeah.
And only then the US media side picks up on it so that it looks like it comes from outside. It's not something that the US media made up out of his own. It's all about, there's a specific order in how those things work out. It starts locally.
Wow.
They allow it to seep in for a month, and then it gets picked up with a vengeance in the US media. And this is how they created this Manafort thing, leading to his being forced out of the Trump campaign back in 2016.
Yeah.
But this was just laying the ground for what came to be known as Crossfire Hurricane. See,
Mhm.
that was
No.
the whole point.
Yeah. The goal was trying to get Trump. From my understanding, they wanted to get Congress to pick up on what was going on around the Manafort thing in order to have this kind of investigation into Trump. Yeah, you're absolutely right. What is going on with the funding in Ukraine right now? I'm seeing multiple reports, so different reports. In one sense, it seems like Trump has cut funding to pretty much everywhere, with the exception of Egypt and Israel. But I wasn't sure if that was including military aid for Ukraine. It sounds like it might be, even though I haven't necessarily received a huge amount of confirmation one way or the other. The stories seem to be contradictory
There's a
over
lot of
whether. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of contradictory stories on this. To be sure, I mean, Israel and Egypt are exempted. That's for definite.
Yeah.
As far as Ukraine is concerned, what had been already vetted and approved is still being processed in a way.
I see.
And some of the equipment is in the surrounding countries, mostly Poland. And until this runs out, it keeps being delivered to the front. As far as any kind of new aid package, for now, the spigot is out. And as far as USAID is concerned, as you mentioned, and that's pretty much vetted, verified. There's no money coming through for the time being until they reevaluate. But I think it's all about reshuffling the personnel. They want to basically do a big purge of Biden administration types and put their own staff in so that they can get a better handle on it. There's also the issue of the audit. They want to find out how the money was used. So that's kind of separate from the USAID freeze. So we'll see. But to be sure, it is not a good thing for the Zelensky regime. And at some point, the rubber is going to meet the road. And that might be actually the intended move.
Right
Trump right now, he's trying to kind of somehow create indirectly the conditions so that there's nothing left to negotiate if Russia knows how to take advantage of, the drying out of the spigot. That's my take on it at this point.
No,
But
you
there's
can
still the element that Europe might pick up the slack. Mark Rutte made a statement.
I mean, would Europe be able to do that? I mean, the U.S. was funding like nearly $300 billion. Can Europe, with all of the budget shortfalls that they have, I mean, the German government has fundamentally collapsed. France is dealing with a budget crisis itself. Can Europe really pick up this tab that America was paying at this point?
Probably not all of it for sure, but they can cobble some kind of aid package. The idea is to try to somehow find they need time to reorganize in the wake of Trump's coming into the White House and his decidedly admitted stance on, I want out of Ukraine. So they're trying to drag him in. They're trying to keep the Ukraine issue alive long enough so that it becomes Trump's war as opposed to Biden's war. In which case, at that point, Trump will have to somehow get more involved in a way where it's consistent with his stance that Russia has to come to the negotiation. But right now, the problem is we don't really have the elements required for Russia to do that. Starting with Zelensky, who was completely politically radioactive, but more importantly, constitutionally illegitimate. So to the extent, and if he was legitimate, he would have to first and foremost cancel out this decree adopted on October 2022, calling for prohibition of negotiation with Ukraine.
Right.
So we have a problem here, and at the same time, Washington, right at this point, Washington doesn't want to be dragged into this because that would be tantamount to an admission that they've been behind the whole thing. So they're trying to get a presentable, option where Ukraine is somehow on its own, deciding to engage Russia in solving the conflict. But as long as we have the current personnel in place, that's not going to happen. So maybe they should, Washington should try to first engineer, because I saw a 6 months tentative road to peace roadmap type of thing. And I saw that a Ukrainian election was somewhat on the 5th out of 6 step. To me, I would actually order a Ukrainian election to take place like immediately or in the shortest delay, so they can wipe the slate clean and at least remove the constitutional barriers that are existing and preventing Russia from taking whoever is running Ukraine right now seriously.
No, that's a really good point. And I think I was speaking to someone and they said something similar to that, that basically the plan may be to push Ukraine into this kind of crisis where they're forced to come to some negotiation. Either your military is going to collapse or you're going to negotiate. It's going to be one or the other. I know they were talking about elections taking place this year. Has there been any movement on elections in Ukraine up to this point?
None whatsoever. For now, it remains a dead letter. There are just things being peddled, but there's nothing concrete. And to the extent we might have thought that there were, some kind of preliminary discussion to try to dust off a framework through which resolving this crisis, even that is not even taking place, as far as I can comprehend the situation right now. Kellogg has not even consulted with the Chinese emissary for Ukraine. Because I'm saying this because last week Trump was urging China to get involved in somehow pressuring Russia in coming to the negotiation table. But if he had known his files, if he had done his homework, he would have known that there's already a Chinese envoy, emissary, and he would have enjoined Kellogg to get in touch with this gentleman and exchange notes. And so all those public pronouncements are, and I'm not even going to get into the 1 million Russian casualty and the Russian
Absurd.
economy
Yeah.
collapsing. It's just, but sometimes, when you get in like this, and to the extent we can assume he's not being fed the right information, obviously, to his discharge. I think he's being peddled, fed a lot of, proverbial, yeah.
I can't tell. Like, I can't tell if Donald Trump is being fed bogus information or if Donald Trump is just lying. Because Trump lies as easily as he breathes. Like every blue moon, Donald Trump will say something that's startlingly, that's shockingly true. But if you think about it, he may not want to seem too eager. He may not want to seem like he is bending over backwards for the Russians in that case, in which case he's like, yeah, 1 million people have died and the Russians are losing, it's a stalemate, everything is going horrible. Like, meaning he may say that, even though he may have somewhat of a different assessment. Because I agree with you. It's very possible that what Donald Trump is doing is letting Ukraine go into a crisis mode, suck away funding, suck away the money, make them kind of deal with the reality that they're effectively confronted with, and see what they come up with. Effectively, all of it is this kind of slow walk into pushing them into a negotiation that Trump ultimately wants them to go into. I mean, I could be wrong. It's very possible that Trump doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Kellogg seems to be incompetent. So you could totally be right on this. Yeah. And from your point of view, Trump has been doing a lot of talk. Like you said, the 1 million people dead. And Marco Rubio recently did an interview. I think he was talking to Megyn Kelly. And he pointed out, he was like, this war needs to end now. And then he says something. He said it needs to go into negotiations. He says in any negotiations, both sides are going to have to give something. Okay, I guess the first question is, what does the U.S. have to push Russia into one way or the other in regards to negotiations? I mean, what does the U.S. have to give that would, let's say, sweeten the deal for Russia to get into some kind of negotiations?
Well, lifting some of the sanctions could be a sweetener, as a good faith sign.
Mhm.
But make no mistake about it, Russia has the initiative in this theater of operation. They're not going to settle for less than revamping the European security architecture, essentially. And you will recall the last few days we've heard people in Romania, but also elsewhere, somehow alluding to the historical maps of modern Ukraine as belonging in parts or in whole to neighboring countries.
Mm-hmm.
So this could also be, the somewhat subliminal reply of Russia to, any kind of time wasting maneuvers. Is that if at some point you don't get, on it and get your hands dirty into the engine, we'll do what we have to do and, partition the place up until there's just a small district of Kiev. That's it.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So Karl Gagetscu pointed out that's the one who they effectively cheated. He should be the prime minister of Romania by now. Is prime minister or president? I forget which one he's running for, but either way, I believe president of Romania. But he was running for the office. They cheated him. He won the first round. Then they claimed that Russia was using TikTok videos in order to get him elected. They found this was nonsense. The man actually won in his own right, and they effectively killed the election. But he points out, he says Ukraine is effectively an invented country, and he said that it will go back to its borders previous to the war, basically the post World War II borders. He said this will happen 100%. the path to an outcome like this is inevitable. Ukraine is an invented state. And he is talking about like Romania, Poland effectively taking parts of whatever's left over of Ukraine. What do you think the chances of that? I mean, do you think, is that where we are? I mean, this sounds a lot like Budanov, actually. Well, Budanov says if we don't have negotiated settlement, Ukraine may cease to exist. And he wasn't talking about like as a rump state. He just says cease to exist. So how big of a concern that other countries in Europe, or other powers in Europe, let's say Lithuania, Poland, Romania, starts taking a chunk of Ukrainian territory? Is that likely? What's the chances?
Well, in geopolitics, everything is possible. And to the extent the current Ukrainian entity ceases to exist because it cannot even function, it has no budget, it is bankrupt, and is militarily defeated, then its fate will be decided by others, basically. And that's the price of surrendering your sovereignty to an hegemon, 5,000 miles away. Is that, when the hegemon just leaves you out to dry, then the local neighbors are going to basically do what they must. And it's really just, hardcore realpolitik here. And Poland will take its chunk, Galicia, Romania will take its chunk, and Hungary will take its chunk.
Yeah, it's Lithuania, Hungary, right?
Yeah. So it's a possibility. There's a consensus here. Everybody would like to get a chunk. It's added resources, and it flatters the nationalistic impulses of all those three states. So if I was in power in any one of those three states, I would look keenly to a scenario along those lines. Although I would not be the one promoting it, I would want to be having the Russian or somehow the situation on the ground, making it so that it is a foyer of instability, and so we need to step in and somehow administer certain areas in a joint group of countries who have historical claim to modern Ukraine, leading essentially to a partition. That's been done and seen before in history. Poland, of all countries, could tell you about it. They've been partitioned at least 2 times, maybe 3 times. So,
good point. Would Russia be okay with that? I mean, up to this point, Russia said no peacekeepers in the region, but partition is a little bit different than peacekeepers, especially if you effectively dismember.
It would be like an absorption. We're talking about an absorption, an administrative, politically legal absorption of 3 huge chunks of current Ukraine, leaving current Ukraine as a rump state with Kiev and its surroundings, like DC. Because basically, the new regions on the eastern side of modern Ukraine are Russian subjects now.
I guess my thing is, would Russia be okay with that? Like, is that an acceptable outcome? That, okay, well, we don't really have to worry about Western Ukraine because Western Ukraine is effectively being absorbed into these other states. Would that be ideal? Because part of the issue that I think they're running into is that if you freeze the conflict, at any point, the conflict can reinvigorate, or for that matter, you're going to get Western countries just dumping a lot of weapons, money, and all of these things back into Western Ukraine with the idea that they may reinitiate the conflict at some point. I guess, but is that no longer is an issue if those areas are absorbed? I mean, because under that model, it would be Poland that is building up a military. It would be Hungary that's building up a military. It wouldn't be Ukraine proper that's building up a military. Am I right on that? Like, am I thinking about this right?
Well, ideally, it would have been great for Ukraine to remain a bridge between NATO and the Slavic world. That was actually what the whole point was to be about. Having this huge country, I mean, it's second largest in Europe after Russia, being somewhat neutral on the security aspect and being this kind of, this bridge, this neutral, glacis, this cordon sanitaire. That was to be, Ukraine's role. by destroying Ukraine, basically, and leading to the absorption of chunks of that country by neighboring countries, all members of NATO. Essentially, Russia finds itself with NATO at its borders, but it's already the case now with Sweden and Finland. So at least things are clear at this point. But there's not going to be, a redux of what we've seen from 2014 to 2022 as far as re-injecting billions of dollars in rebuilding Ukraine's military, because it would be, essentially Poland and or Hungary or Romania. So things will somehow get clearer in a way.
And I guess from my point of view, if they had to go all the way to the border of Poland, meaning if the Russian military had to go all the way to the border where they had to take Western Ukraine, that is,
I don't think they would do that.
yeah, that's a worse outcome.
No. They don't want to get into a
Guerrilla war.
Partisan, yeah, exactly. Partisan guerrilla warfare. That's exactly what the Rand would want Russia to mistake itself into doing. So it's not going to happen. So you have to provoke, you have to create the conditions so that the current entity called Ukraine as a political construct collapses from within, essentially. Short of resources, short of support, short of legitimacy, and basically exposed to popular wrath, popular anger, because at some point, somebody's going to have to politically take the blame for this disaster that's been going on in Ukraine. So it's a matter of time. Now we can do it the easy way, or as far as Washington is concerned, because in fine, this is also about what Washington's going to do. Bannon actually published an article a week ago or 10 days ago where he said that if this thing is not resolved in a satisfactory way within, I would say, the next 6 months to 9 months, by next fall for sure, this war will become Trump's war. It will become Trump's Vietnam. This is what Bannon says. And so I think we have to look at the EU, the EU, the European Union, and some of the remnants of the old administration in the US ganging up to try to basically tie Trump up to Ukraine until it becomes his war and that he cannot somehow, get rid of it, so to speak. They want to keep this alive.
But do they have that capability of doing that? I mean, because Joe Biden was like, we're with you for as long as it takes. He did this for like 3 years. And to your point, they were trying to Trump-proof Ukraine, basically try to get all of this money to Ukraine in advance, with this belief that Trump was going to come in and cut the funding, I suppose, which is exactly what he did. He cut the funding for it. If Europe is not going to be able to effectively replace the amount of money that the United States was putting into it, if the US is no longer putting money into it, if all of these sectors of the Ukrainian economy are effectively collapsing, for lack of a better word, like what is the outcome? I mean, let me ask you this. Is there anybody other than Zelensky that is a political potential in that country?
Well, let's answer your first question first. I think there's a possibility that they basically seize part of the $300 billion that belongs to Russia. I mean, you have to understand they are in an existential crisis right now. The NATO EU condominium. Those people, if Ukraine, as it were, in their own words, collapses or loses, they lose with it. They're goners. The whole thing will unravel at the seam, and we already see, first signs going on of that now, with decisions, a lot of disunity and a lot of people like Denmark resuming, talks with Gazprom to fix the Nord Stream 2. So this is becoming really worrying for the establishment, writ large. So they have one gambit left, is to basically say, go for broke, seize some of those $300 billion belonging to Russia to keep financing, the war. I would not put it past them to do that.
Yeah.
This is how idiotic and ideologically driven those people are.
How do you explain Denmark allowing the Russians to work on Gazprom? This seems random. It seems out the blue.
Yeah, well, it could obviously this has something to do with Trump's statements on Greenland. So they're trying to basically say if you keep on acting stupid, we too can act stupid, and this will unravel the whole strategy, the whole policy adopted by all the members of the alliance, bearing on sanctioning Russia exports and allowing Russia to export its gas. Why should we go to the ravine if you're not playing ball with, keep playing ball with us the way your predecessor was?
Yeah.
And now you're saying, you want to get Greenland. So essentially, you're going your own way. You want to create your own sphere of influence. You want to grab a piece of something that does not belong to you, and you want to somehow, throw us under the bus. you know,
But that's what he's doing. I mean, for all
that's what he's
intents and
doing.
purposes,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think
He's
this method is chaos. This is what he's trying to do. He's trying to force them to do something that would then saw the roots of disunity and discord within the NATO complex, EU NATO complex. This is what he's doing. He's done with this. He wants America to basically go mono doctrine 2.0, grab Greenland because strategically, and this is the next theater of operation for the next 100 years, is the Arctic Circle. This is where it's going to be, and by seizing or somehow coming to term with Denmark in acquiring Greenland, the US will become a major player in this rush for natural resources once the Northwest Passage becomes completely available. So this guy is thinking 10, 15 years down the road right now.
What do you think the
So
chances
Ukraine
of
looks
him?
passé.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What do you think the chances of him getting Greenland? I mean, for all of the threats that are taking place, and apparently behind the scenes, Denmark was telling Europe, "Don't bring it up. Don't say anything about it. Let's just be quiet about it. Maybe it'll blow over." And as Marco Rubio pointed out, Donald Trump is very serious about getting his hands on Greenland. So, what do you think the chances are? Like, that's astonishing. Because you're right. Donald Trump has decided he's going to go it alone. He was like, yeah, we don't need this NATO stuff. We don't need this European stuff. We can have a North American continent with America as the main driver in this. We can get our hands on Greenland so we can be in the Arctic. We can be a super continent in the way that Donald Trump is thinking about it. We don't need Europe. That seems to be where he's going with this.
Yeah, and this would then lead to maybe a Yalta 2.0, with like the sphere of influence being redefined. The Eurasian landmass is being left alone. China, as far as great power competition, will be just basically a tech race. But every one of the big three has its own sphere of influence, and mechanisms are put in place so that there's no creeping over each other's, red lines.
Mhm.
And yeah, that would be a viable construct to me. I mean, in this imperfect world. But so it depends on Donald Trump and how he can somehow navigate through the red tape that for sure is going to be thrown his way, not only at home, but across the Atlantic. This is really what's going to be interesting, at least until 2026 and the midterms, which may, reshuffle the deck of cards in the US and lessen the Trump administration control of the Republic's levers. But otherwise, the next 2 years are going to be fascinating to watch as far as the standoff between Washington and Brussels, essentially.
One last question on this: does Europe does Europe have anything that they can force Trump's hand? Like, meaning, does Europe have any levers, any leverage or powers that can kind of keep Trump involved in Ukraine? Or for all intents and purposes, it's the US's discretion on whether or not they want to remain in this process?
Well, some of the EU, the bigger EU countries, could decide unilaterally to send troops to Ukraine to secure whatever
There's no way.
resources. Yeah, Well, we're dealing with Macron. We're dealing with someone who is perfectly capable of doing this. Macron is the exemplar of the globalist order, who doesn't look at Donald Trump as a good thing. And he actually is the only one who came out and told Denmark, if you need troops to defend Greenland, we're there. We're there for you. That's Macron. So everything is possible. When you have like Tin Men running traditionally, storied countries like France, UK, and Germany, anything can happen. I mean, they want to remain relevant. They don't want to disappear into the night.
Yeah.
And so, they will do whatever it takes to keep dragging the US into Ukraine until a new election takes place and they get more friendly personnel back in office. That's my take on it.
Just amazing. Just outright amazing.
Yeah.
The idea that France is talking about, we'll send troops in. Okay, good luck with that. Those troops be targeted immediately. I mean,
sure. Well, Moscow has said so, like only 2 days ago. Any NATO troops that comes in will be legitimate targets.
They don't have a choice. I mean, it's a nose under the camel's tent. It's like if you don't target those troops, then it sets a precedent that you can add in more troops that Moscow is not going to go after on those troops. Yeah, those people are going to be targets right off the bat. I can't. I have a hard time believing Macron would do that without the backing of the United States. It's that part.
Well, Macron doesn't need the backing of the United States. Macron right now is politically at home, completely against the wall. I mean, there are a lot of discussion and doubts as to whether or not he can even finish his current term. Yeah. So he's beleaguered, and if you study the guy's psychological profile, he's perfectly able to up the antes and basically allow himself to call for the Article 16, which is the full powers, dissolution of parliament, suspension of parliamentary powers. And the only way he can do that is by creating a military conflict, engaging France. And this would basically be the trip. He's willing to sacrifice French troops to get that casus belli, this kind of seminal event, which would then get NATO to really, have no choice but to, show their true colors. Are you in or are you out?
But that's not really forcing NATO. I mean, like, that's France going unilaterally into a war zone. That has nothing to do with NATO at that point. That's just purely France.
I know, but if you keep in mind what the narrative and the traditional media narrative has been about, is Russia won't suffice itself with Ukraine. They're coming for Western Europe afterward.
But that's France invading. I guess that's my issue with them, right? Like, this is
they will frame it. They will frame it. They control the media. I mean, there's a lot of alternative medias, to be sure, and we're trying our best to, get those 15 critical % of people awakened. But make no mistake about it. Those mastodon, corporate media still have a sway over hundreds of millions of people. So they can get the narrative set so that Russia will be characterized as the aggressor. Whereas France was trying to basically create, protect some minorities there, or prevent Russia from taking the whole of Ukraine. Right. They will do it like this.
Macron invaded Ukraine in order to protect.
Watch Macron, and hope for Candace to come up with the goods.
Oh man, that is outrageous. That is outrageous. Look, you're not wrong. I mean, with 90% of the media, the only catch with that, right? 90% of the media is being paid by the U.S. State Department. I have a hard time believing that Donald Trump is going to be okay with Macron doing some nonsense like that, and the media being okay with it. Who knows? You might be right. God, man, that is so outrageous. Macron invades, and then the media is like, he did this for defensive reasons. It's like, okay, sure he did.
The bigger the lie, the better. This is how it's a main principle.
Yeah,
you have to make it, the bigger the lie, the better, to push the policy.
Yeah. It's like, well, that lie's too big. There's no way he's lying about that. It's too big. Yeah.
Well, that's what we thought about the WMDs in Iraq.
That is true.
After 10 years plus of sanctions, and the dismantling of the arsenal back in the early 90s, this is what they went with. And they basically hammered it like a marketing campaign at the close of summer 2002. They came out for the fall with this new message, and it was peddled and hammered into people's mind until February, March 2003 for 8 months. And next thing you know, people were convinced that the secular state of Iraq was in cahoots with Al Qaeda.
Just outrageous. It's just astonishing to me the way, like, for all of the talk about people saying they don't trust mainstream media, it still has clout. Like, it still has this ability to influence. I mean, even the stories that we typically talk about are in relation to media. Like, it's in relation to something that the media is effectively running with, as ludicrous as some of this stuff is. You're absolutely right. Before I let you go, Romania, for example. So you sent me this article, and thank you for sending me this. So it says Council of Europe body casts doubt on Romania election annulment. That's a no-duh, right? That's a complete no-duh. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're saying that the Russians using TikTok videos. Now, I knew this was nonsense right off the bat. I knew this was nonsense because I lived in the United States, where they tried to say that Twitter ads were the reason that Hillary Clinton lost her race, which was, again, ludicrous. Hillary Clinton spent like over $1 billion in that race. Clinton had like a $5 million Twitter army. And they're trying to say that $50,000 of Twitter ads, Twitter and Facebook ads, half of which that happened after the election, was responsible for Hillary Clinton losing the election. So when I hear TikTok ads were put out by the Russians in order to help this candidate, I was like, okay, this is nonsense. This is complete nonsense. Come to find out, it was one of the liberal parties in Romania that was responsible for those ads. And yet they annulled the election. Again, that is mind-blowing. So the article points out, it says the Venice Commission for the Council of Europe's advisory body on constitutional matters has raised concerns about the annulment of Romania's presidential election last December. Again, that's a no-duh. Like, obviously, you should be concerned about the fact that they annulled a presidential election when it seems like the guy who they didn't want to win was going to win and was going to win handsomely. Is there any movement on this, though? Like, does the fact that they take issue with this matter? Has a new election been set up yet? Has there been any consequences for them annulling this election? Which is, again, outlandish to me. Like, it is very difficult for me to wrap my head around the fact that they just kill an election when they don't like the results of the election.
Well, actually, it's interesting. It shows that not everything is well in Brussels, in the EU, and that they might have gone a step too far with this. Not to mention, I mean, the election is not cancelled. It's just been postponed until next May. Will be held in May.
Okay.
But there's been a first polling taking place, and that same guy, Georgescu, is polling at 50% in the first round. So he could actually win right out the presidency. Not even a need for a runoff.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? You're gonna throw the guy in jail, try to invalidate his candidature. This is, something that they're perfectly willing to do. But you have to read this piece of news in coordination with the other piece I sent you, which is this vote, this piece of legislation, this vote that was adopted jointly in the Bundestag between the CDU and the AfD. So this shows that there might be forces in Europe right now, opposition forces, some of them admittedly sovereign oriented, who have the backup of the new incoming Trump administration, who might just be saying, it's our turn now. Because Trump also, make no mistake about it, he understands that in Europe, there are people who think like his MAGA movement. And so if he wants to get Europe to somehow bow down to the imperial, and kiss the imperial ring, it would behoove him to promote the election of parties who are local version of MAGA, I guess.
Yeah.
AfD is that. And it was interesting because that joint vote between the CDU, Christian Democrats, Merkel's party, and the AfD was a breach of consensus that had been agreed on in the wake of World War II to never whatsoever enter into negotiation or alliances,
That's
even
right.
on a ad hoc adoption of legislation with a party considered extremist. And AfD, in some circles in Germany, is being touted as an extremist party.
They consider Nazis for all intents and purposes.
But you get the
Why?
point.
Yeah. I totally get it. I guess my thing is, why did that break down though? Why? Because the same thing happened in France with Marie Le Pen's party. Up to that point, they were supposed to do any and everything in their power to prevent working with Marie Le Pen, and it's very possible that one of the other political parties in France may actually.
But so far, it's holding.
Yes.
What we've seen collapse in Germany so far is still holding in France.
Yeah. Why did it collapse in Germany? I guess is the question.
I think in Germany, the political culture is quite different. France, owing to its revolutionary history, has always been somewhat left, if not radical left.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Germans, as a Protestant, no-nonsense approach to business, and they like their monies, they like their profit, and right now they're seeing that this whole policy has basically led them into the wall.
Yeah.
So that German common sense, deeply ingrained common sense approach to affairs is basically now impossible to ignore. And AfD is making so many gains; it would become politically explosive if they were to try to outlaw AfD. And it might have been done if Trump had not gone into office, but a lot of water has gone under the bridge since then. We've had this discussion between Musk and Alice Weidel, the head of AfD. That really just like put her on a different dimension. There was a AfD party meeting last weekend, and Musk came out and endorsed, and told every German in attendance
I saw
and
that.
beyond.
I
Yeah.
saw.
So we're dealing with something here that it's a game changer. When you have someone like Musk coming in, it's a game changer. Look what happened in the UK. First, there was a stone wall of this notion that thousands of young girls in the UK had been left to their own devices, unprotected by the authorities.
Right.
As soon as Musk got involved, they caved in and called for an investigation. So,
I mean, but when Musk goes out and gives a Nazi salute, they don't see that in Germany. Like, because obviously it's a dog whistle. I mean, he's acting like, oh, I don't know I don't know. I didn't know that was a Nazi salute. Is that really a Nazi salute? Yes, it's a Nazi salute. He knows exactly what he's doing. It wasn't even half-assed. It was like full-blown, looked like something, that would be coming out of the Hitler administration. And I get the sense that this was kind of a dog whistle to the AfD. And he even said, you guys need to put your Nazi past behind you, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah,
he said Germans should be proud to be German again.
Yeah. And you get Annalena Baerbock, who talks about her grandfather, who was
a Nazi.
Yeah. Just outrageous. He's like, yeah, my grandfather, it just puts me in the mind when he's standing here on the Oder. It's like, dude, your grandfather was a Nazi. Is this really what you should be talking about right now when we're having celebrations about the liberation of Auschwitz?
Yeah, but then look, they don't invite the Russians who liberated the camps, and they invite Zelensky, who was the avatar of the neo-Nazism these days.
Just outrageous.
So this whole thing is.
What happens if the AfD wins? Meaning, if the AfD takes power in Germany, they are very skeptical of this war. They're skeptical of the sanctions. Doesn't this kind of sanction regime, or at the very least the war, another plank falls out of this kind of war party in Europe?
Yeah, well, Germany is a crucial country. It's the only country in Europe with the industrial might capable of really, if they were to retool and really start manufacturing weapons, they would really create a problem for Russia. So this election in February is crucial. Will AfD win right out the chancellorship? No. I think they are ranked second
Mhm.
behind CDU. So it would be a CDU. It could be a CDU. That's why this event of a couple of days ago is so important, because it shows they can actually work together. They were protesting in Berlin, calling, basically for, those things not to happen again. But it's like they crossed the Rubicon. It's done, and the world is still here. The world is still turning. So people might be ready ready to actually go all the way and validate a coalition between CDU and AfD, and we most likely would get Christopher Marx. I think he's the leader of CDU, will be the new chancellor.
Yeah.
But AfD will weigh heavily on the orientation of the cabinet. And as you mentioned, they want to resume gas supply. They want to serve Germany's economy, and in so doing, basically that would be the death knell for any kind of plan to reignite the war against Ukraine at some point. If
Wow.
Germany basically is the main bloc here.
That is
But beware Macron.
Beware Macron.
He might try this kind of Hail Mary pass. That's Macron. Macron is unpredictable.
I mean, we don't even know if Macron is going to be in office come next year. Because what he is out, I think the next election is like 2027 or something like that. He keeps saying he's going to stay, but it's unclear whether or not he's going to be able to have the political clout to stay. We'll see. What do you say? Beware Macron. Beware Macron. Beware Macron. Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Really good conversation. I deeply appreciate this conversation. When I hit you up, I'm sorry you feel bad. I feel bad bringing you on if you feel bad. But thank you for this.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm nursing it.
Arnaud Develay. He's an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law, participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is the author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. Arnaud, man, be safe. You have a good one, man. Be safe. Have a good one.
Thank you, Jamal.
All right. Really good conversation. That is